I wasn't drafted. I was stupid. I was young and dumb, and I believed a recruiter. And you don't do that. You don't believe a recruiter.
Pro tip, never believe a recruiter
Right.
for the military.
Welcome back to War is Stupid, an anti-war podcast about war. I'm honored to welcome Susan O'Neill and Michael Carter of Common Defense, a veteran-led grassroots movement dedicated to protecting democracy, combating authoritarianism, and building a future where liberty and justice truly are for all. I'm excited to learn from both a member and an organizer. Susan is a Vietnam and Peace Corps veteran, writer, and editor, and Michael is an organizer and fellow product of the musical theater 2 activist pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
We were in a production of Sweeney Todd together in college. And now I promise I won't talk about Stephen Sondheim too much, even though we have 2 Sondheim records in the background right now. But incidentally, Sweeney Todd is a musical about combating authoritarianism and seeking liberty and justice, albeit with murder and cannibalism. So I'm excited to learn about non-cannibalistic ways to fight for a better world. Welcome, Susan and Michael.
Just want to make clear up front that Common Defense does not endorse cannibalism.
Phew.
What?
I know. Might have been.
This is a scoop. You heard it here first on War is Stupid, an anti-war podcast about war. So, yes, Susan, I'd like to begin with you. Where and when did you serve?
I actually served in three different hospitals. One because the first one, Fubai, because they closed it down. It was a tiny place that was inflatable, which is, you would think, a design flaw.
Wow.
And there's stuff flying through the air. But at any rate, yeah, they closed it down because they were Vietnamizing the war, which I always thought was a really interesting concept, you know. And from there, they sent me to Chu Lai, where we were the smaller of 2 hospitals on the campus. And it was terrible because a lot of my techs and a lot of the people on the base had thought that they would be working more with GIs and got really upset that they were working with a lot of Vietnamese. And to me, that seemed, a natural thing considering what we were doing to the Vietnamese. But I ultimately asked my commanding officer to send me to another place, and she said, "I'll send you to the worst hellhole in Vietnam." And she sent me to Cu Chi, which was a large installation, and it was amazing. The team was great. Nobody complained about who they were working on. We were busy. It was well worth the trade in, getting off the South China Sea.
And you served as a nurse?
Yeah, I was an operating room nurse.
So what kind of injuries did you treat?
Everything. I mean, we had some surgeons who were specialists in things that you wouldn't expect to see there, but they did amazing work. We did a lot of amputations. We did constant picking of fragments. The whole team was kind of involved in taking metal out of people, basically. A lot of injuries from grenades and a goodly number of injuries from mines.
Wow.
And that's still happening. There are places in Vietnam where there's still ordnance that's buried, and kids will find it when they go digging around for scrap metal because they live in very poor places. It's nasty.
So, yeah, the effects are still being felt on the ground
Absolutely.
years later. And a question for both of you is, when politicians and bumper stickers and shirts say support the troops, or it's about to be Memorial Day, so we're about to get a lot of emails from car companies and mattress companies telling us the best way to support the troops is by using the special promo code and buying new things. When politicians say support the troops, what do they mean, and what should they mean?
Michael, I've been holding forth. You go for it.
Well, so I think what they mean often, depending on the person who's saying it, is that you need to support the actions of the American national security state. And they're conflating that with supporting the troops, right? So what the troops might be doing at any given time, kind of on a broader mission level, they're saying support them, red, white, and blue. If you're against the war in Iran, if you're against the war in Iraq, if you're against the war in Afghanistan, if, back then you were against the war in Vietnam, you're not supporting the troops. But I would challenge folks who kind of see it that way to realize that the people making these decisions, the people sending people into harm's way, are very, very rarely the same people who suffer and die as a result of these decisions. And so I would say the best way to support the troops or support the people who end up in our military is to make sure that the actions of that military and the ways in which we use our military force are responsible and are rooted in the actual needs of the American people, not rooted in either the needs of the national security state or other nation states or the billionaire class or any of the other people who end up disproportionately benefiting from these kinds of actions. I don't know if you have thoughts about that as one of the people involved, Susan.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. And I think that leaves out basically any war that's happened in recent years, because they're all seem to be wars of choice. I also just hate. Thank you for your service. And people don't understand why. There are people that I would accept that from, and they are Vietnam vets who've had to deal with nurses and who understand what we did. That's fine. That's a whole different animal. But the whole thank you for your service thing came about through W. And the whole concept at the time was, we didn't welcome back the Vietnam vets well, so we're going to make things look like we're, being copacetic about. And it was essentially a move that was one of a large number of moves that they made in order not to create it or recreate the draft. And because they knew the draft would not be popular, so instead glorify the person who went out there and into a war that should never have been. I mean, I have no truck whatsoever with other Vietnam vets. I mean, I just don't. I don't care what their beliefs about it are, about their service was, but I just think it's like, why would you maluse these well-trained troops just to do something that, is dubious in its concept, but is even more dubious in its effect? I really think sometimes that we create wars because we've never in our lifetime been part of a war that was on our turf. You don't want to host one.
Yes, when talking about removing metal from human flesh, it's so distant to the majority of people. People don't know what war actually looks like, but you do. You were there. You saw it, and you helped mitigate some of the damage. What's it been like to watch the same mistakes being made over and over again? And we're not even getting good Bruce Springsteen songs out of them. Yeah, when you were talking about how the vets were treated poorly when they came home, we got Born in the USA out of it, but clearly Reagan misunderstood it and used it as an unironic campaign song.
And its son is a similar vibe.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, see, that's another thing here is, one of the good things that came out of Vietnam was that there was a popular, I was on the folk end of things. I had my little guitar and I could do my 3 chords, because you didn't really have to know how to play it. And I'd sit on the hooch at night if I had time, on the top of the hooch. And
What's a hooch?
we'd gather. It's a place where you live. And
Wow.
generally it was a metal roof over some, slapped up boards, and only more formalized. For women, ours were much more. They looked more like houses, but they had all of us in them. So I'd sit up on the top and just noodle around with my guitar, and we'd end up with sing-alongs, and have 7/8 of the time, most of the stuff was protest.
Wow. On the ground,
Yeah.
singing protest music.
Well, there's an amazing few books written by a friend of mine. Doug Bradley wrote a book called The Tracks of My Years. That's his newest one, and it's about how various songs affected him. But he also had a couple of them specifically about Vietnam, one that he did with Craig Werner, I believe. This is out of the University of Wisconsin. And the books are great because they just kind of consolidate how important music was to that stage of the game. But we just don't have that now. And I don't understand why there's not some. It's got to be something you can sing. It can't be like the Minnesota theme. I mean, it's just, there's no way you can incorporate all that into a sing-along. So, I'm a little disappointed in that we haven't come up with something better.
I guess that's where us theater kids need to come in. There's a reason why there's the there's the theater to activism pipeline. Yeah, I'd love to hear more. What songs in particular? I'm wearing a Bob Dylan shirt. I figured I'd set the mood, and I'd also like to see your shirt for the people who are watching. Susan is wearing a Department of Veterans Affairs shirt that says "Not for Sale." Yeah, what incredible!
Defense. You can buy it in Common Defense merch.
Yeah, so that shirt is referencing our VA Not for Sale campaign, which is basically saying the VA has had its problems in the past, but it is the main public healthcare system in the United States. It is the largest one, and it serves, hundreds of thousands of veterans. It also represents one of the commitments that are made to veterans when they sign up for whatever reason. And this current administration has basically pursued a policy of cutting anybody or not filling unfilled positions that they felt didn't fit their agenda. And we're seeing the results of that there are various delays in care and issues with lack of mental health support, issues with veterans having to do what they're euphemistically calling community care, which is basically going into the private sector. So there's a privatization plan underway related to the VA. And for those of us who believe in universal health care, it's a huge step backwards, right? Because this is the only socialized healthcare system in the United States. The trick is it only exists for veterans, and veterans, while they have a lot of cultural power, can be an isolated constituency. It's only around 6% of the population. And, the Trump administration and the profiteers behind it have seen an opportunity to privatize as much as is possible to basically starve the beast. It's the classic tactic where you underfund an agency and then you point to the issues resulting from the underfunding of the agency as a reason to say, okay, government doesn't work. This agency doesn't work. Let's just hand it off to the private sector where, all studies show results are worse. There's also the whole piece where Veterans Affairs clinicians have a lot more of that specialized knowledge of what veterans have faced. So, Susan goes into a civilian psychotherapist and is like, I just really can't get the sight of taking shrapnel out of that child's heart out of my brain. And that civilian therapist does not have the training and does not have the experience or necessarily understanding to help her process that experience. Or it could be physical. It could be like, how many private sector doctors see somebody with shrapnel? Not that many. And so, I don't know if you have more to say on that topic, Susan.
Well, one thing that people often don't know is that not every veteran gets the care. You have to, for some reason or other, they opened it up to, female veterans of Vietnam a while back. I was working in a a soup kitchen, and somebody said, "Hey, you're a Vietnam veteran. Would you put these posters up?" So I put them up, and they were, "If you're a woman veteran of Vietnam, please call your VA," and it gave a number. This was in Massachusetts. The next week I came back, they were gone, and they were gone. So I asked the coordinator, I said, "What gives with the?" She said, "Well, they had too much of a response."
Oh, no.
But anyway, so yeah, so certain elements of people are I am because I was, you're presumed that you will probably have some issue if you're a Vietnam vet. So that's okay, but not necessarily everybody who comes out of the newer wars qualifies unless they have something that they can actually say is a disability that came from that era. In our case, so much of it is Agent Orange. My husband, he has a fairly decent sized issue with Agent Orange and takes a handful of pills every day. He still looks healthier than he ought to.
You met in Vietnam?
Yeah, yeah. Met in my last duty assignment.
Wow.
So I can't complain.
That's an amazing story. Michael, what it was something you've learned about the veteran experience that surprised you since beginning your work with Common Defense as a non-veteran?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I sort of had an inkling of, but it sort of did surprise me was how many of the folks involved in common defense and involved in, activism after their service really don't appreciate the thank you for your service thing.
Mm.
There are some people I think who do enjoy it, and I had a friend, a while back who also didn't enjoy it, but it's been a common refrain because I think that there's a sense of dehumanization that comes.
Mm.
And there's also a sense that, like, your life is over. Like, thank you for the thing you did, and that's who you are forever now.
Wow.
Um, yeah. So
Susan, what should we say? What would you like to hear?
Just treat us like normal human beings. I mean, it's a piece of our lives, and it was. I will grant you a very formative piece because you get it when you're young. You carry it with you for a long time. It's had some interesting side effects. I mean, I came to grips with my mortality there because I saw so many people who were young dying and horribly maimed in that, and I realized that you don't know for whom the bell is going to toll. So so I've now been working as a volunteer with hospice since hospice came to the States. I have a gig out at Calvary Hospital every week now. And it's something I do, I think, well, because, we're all headed there. It's not a horrible thing. I don't know what's after, but, I would have said initially probably nothing was once I gave up Catholicism for Lent. I have to admit, but I have to admit that I've seen a lot of things that make me think that, there is something, and maybe we get to come back and redress situations. Maybe we don't, but there's some people actually see people welcoming them, that sort of thing. And I think it's real. I can't tap into it, but yeah, hey. So anyway, yeah, so there are these little offshoots of things that come from having been in the military, but I don't know that there should be any universal greeting. I mean,
yeah. It,
like, nanu nanu.
it's of a piece with the militarization of a lot of parts of our society, like where you sort of put people up on a pedestal, which means you don't need to take care of them, you don't need to listen to them or their perspectives. You just get to kind of put them in a category and put them on the shelf like a toy soldier and say, thank you for your service. You are serving me. There's also a power imbalance there too, because of the way that, that sounds and is. And, and that is also something that I kind of knew, but has been underscored through this work, is how much people who are veterans just want to be treated like normal people. And they have a very formative, important experience in their lives, many of them. But oftentimes, like, there's already a big isolation in the way that we run our volunteer army, where there's a whole kind of, and this was different in the Vietnam era, but there's a whole subculture and internal culture within the military that is deliberately severed from civilian culture. So it means that reentry into civilian life for these folks can often be sort of difficult because there's this piece of their life that A, people don't really understand, and then B, people feel like they can't even really engage with beyond just thank you for your service because they're afraid, because they're not willing to confront the reality of what's happening. And that's another piece that I've learned about working with veterans is they're a lot more willing to really stare some of the very dark things that happen in this world in the face.
Yeah, there's a whole dark sense of humor that comes with comes with the experience, and that can be problematic if you write about it.
But it is, it's helpful because we have this sanitizing language, right? You talk about a precision strike or a kinetic strike or any of these euphemisms that are used for what is essentially bombing people from the air, and leading to many of them dying or becoming injured. And there's a deliberate attempt to make it so that civilians are not supposed to know about, not supposed to think about, and heaven forbid, engage with and try to influence the course of our military industrial complex. They want us to think it's clean, it's safe, it's easy, no American ever dies, all the people who died deserved it. And, you just go back to your normal life. You thank the folks who did it for their service. They take on this burden for you, and then you go back to your normal life. And that is antithetical to democracy. But it's the way that the national security state wants all of us to interact with it.
Well, one of the things that I used to get a lot of crap for was when they abolished the draft. I said I thought that was a mistake.
That's very interesting.
Because if your butt's not on the line, you're not going to protest it. That was one of the reasons there were so many protests during the Vietnam era, because you had a stake in it and that you no longer have a stake in it. Yeah, I understand that no one should be sent to anywhere. That should be, but who cares about that? You have a volunteer army who are willing to go because that's the job that they have. And it isn't until they've actually engaged that so many of them realize what that job means to themselves. It's really stupid. I mean, I wasn't drafted. I was stupid. I was young and dumb, and I believed a recruiter. And you don't do that. You don't believe a recruiter.
Pro tip, never believe a recruiter.
Right.
For the military.
You can go to Germany, you can go, but there's a waiting list a mile long for nurses to go to Vietnam. Yeah.
So what was the interaction with the recruiter like? How did you sort of chance your way into becoming a nurse in Vietnam?
Actually, I felt it's Catholic guilt. Because I'd left the Catholic Church, but I kept the guilt, right? That just comes with the territory. So I had this Catholic guilt, and I felt really bad because my parents, who had 5 kids, and they said that my mother was amazing at putting a budget together, and my dad was the working guy. He went off to the factory. He came home with he was a United Rubber worker, which when you're a teenager is hilarious. But at any rate, so he had this whole we had this whole conventional 50s to 60s family thing going on, and they were paying for my, albeit super cheap, because in those days, these things were everywhere, a 3-year nursing school. They were sponsored by the various hospitals who wanted to engage the nurses. You still, at the end of your 3 years, a lot of which was practicum. And if, like 1 year of it was scholastics, but they would send you, to take your boards, and some people passed and some people didn't and had to retake it. It was the same boards that you get if you went 4 years. So if you passed that, you were an RN. So there were a lot of us around, and they really targeted the 3-year nurses, I think, specifically because we were usually not from very wealthy families. And I felt kind of bad because they say they were paying for my nursing school. And a friend of mine was very gung-ho. I mean, her brother even went to, what is it, a high school, a military high school that they usually send you to if you're like Trump, if you're a problem.
Yeah.
He wasn't even a problem. He just went to this, his parents sent him off. They were very gung-ho. So she wanted to join. And she wanted to join so she could get a stipend for the last year that would take her off her parents' dole and so forth. And she was going to do it in Chicago. And she said, we were in Indiana, in this little podunk town, Anderson at the time. It's now a real town, but it was like nothing. But at any rate, so it was kind of owned and operated by Delco Remy and the Church of God. So,
Mm.
your Church of God, you couldn't dance, you couldn't.
Oh, you grew up in the movie Footloose.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, but anyway, so this was my nursing school. It was connected with a Catholic hospital. And so we took off. She had one of the few cars on campus, and she drove up to Chicago, and I went with her because, hey, Chicago was out of Indiana. And as I was sitting there waiting for her to get done with her physical, which basically in those days they needed nurses so desperately, they'd kind of, pass the pass the mirror under your nose to make sure that you were breathing. And she was doing her thing, and this big, kind of rotund, straight out of central casting guy who was sitting behind the desk turned to me and said, "Well, what about you?" And I said, "I joined the army." I said, I protest. I go out, I play my guitar, and, I don't do this. I don't believe in this Vietnam War." And he said, you don't have to believe in it. There's a waiting list a mile long for nurses who really want to go there. But there are all these places they're leaving, and you could go to California, you could go to Japan, you could go to, and he reeled off these places, and I thought, well, I could do that, and I'd get credit for playing against type too, because that's kind of fun. So, little community theater background.
Oh,
So,
yeah. Oh, we love that.
so I signed. And next thing I know, I'm sitting there after it took like 2 months to pass your boards in those days because nothing was computerized. We didn't know what a computer was. So we in the interim, I went off for the first time to the East and decided that I was going to go to a camp, a Jewish girls' camp in New Hampshire, which I knew nothing about. And I learned a lot about Jewish people because there weren't many in my town. And I had a good time at this camp and, did a lot of, taking care of things like poison ivy from people doing their thing against the tree, notice the three leaves and stuff like that. Mostly the counselors I seem to be treating.
Mhm.
And when I got out of that, I passed the boards, went down to Fort Sam Houston. And on our first day, there's this guy who I swear to God looks exactly like the guy who recruited me in Chicago, and he's walking back and forth. He's got the pit stains. It's hotter than hell. There's no air conditioning, but there are these big fans, and he's saying, "You might have heard there was a waiting list a mile long for nurses for Vietnam. Well, before the end of this year, half of you will be there because it's no longer the case, and the other half of you will be on orders." And I said, "Holy shit. I don't know anything about trauma nursing. What can I do?" So right after that, I literally ran to the education office and I asked them, is there something I can do that I won't have to pay back extra time for because I didn't think I was going to be a very good soldier, given my background, that would prepare me for this? And he said, "We really need operating room nurses and there's no extra time added. And, we have something coming up at Fort Sam Houston here for that. It's a 4-year course. And if you pass that, you will certainly go to Vietnam." I said, "Sounds like I certainly will anyway." And he said, "Probably, yeah." And he said, "Okay." So I worked on the ward with the amputations at Fort Sam Houston. It was, anything that had to do with bones, but mostly there we were talking about bones that had come in from Vietnam. And saw the end result of what I'd be getting and took the 4-year course or the 4-month course. And it was easily the best course I've ever had in anything. Having gone back to school for journalism and stuff like that, I can appreciate that. But they did send me right away. So, but the little, I would have preferred to be a journalist part of my brain said, maybe you learned something over there.
Do you think they still use similar tactics today? I feel like now military recruiting, I get ads on Hulu. It's showing me I'm trying to watch Abbott Elementary, and it's showing like sizzle reels that at first you think is for like an upcoming action movie, but no, they're selling you as join the army in real life. From the veterans you organize with, is
Hmm.
have
What?
do they have similar interactions with recruiters that have led to their service?
Do they? I mean, because I thought I kind of took for granted that a lot of people just kind of came into it, first of all, for a job because I got stuck. I got stranded by surprise, surprise, Spirit Air ages ago when I went out to do a gig. I wrote a book, so I was doing a gig at a place in the South, and I got stranded in South Carolina and ended up coming back on a bus. And on the bus, I swear to God, everybody on it who was young was either coming from a recruiter or going to a recruiter. And this was well past the time when of the draft, and they were doing it for economic reasons.
Mm.
So I just kind of assumed, which you know what they say about that.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, I have definitely heard in my work so far. I mean, one of my coworkers, for example, the recruiter told I mean, which he didn't deploy. He went to the Illinois National Guard, and the National Guard were like, he was like, I want to do intelligence. And they're like, you know what's just like intelligence? Being a military policeman. And so he's like, okay. And then he, spends the rest of the time like kind of dealing with the drunk tank or with like the soldier who's, out too late or whatever the military police does. Certainly not intelligence. So, that's just an anecdote, but these folks have quotas. And there aren't really strong accountability structures if they do lie, particularly if it's not in writing anywhere. So I definitely would wager that there's a good amount of maybe not outright deception in the sense like you're going to get $50,000, but actually you're not getting it, but deception in the sense of like really mischaracterizing exactly what you're signing up for and exactly the benefits available to you. You also do get folks who, once they leave service, they realize that the sort of benefits that the recruiter talked about were not written down anywhere and were less generous than portrayed. It is a lot of times there's a huge economic piece to this. You'll notice that Army recruiting stations and Army recruiting officers are disproportionately stationed in low income communities, communities of color, environmental justice communities. There is, I mean, some people refer to it as the poverty draft, which is a way to consider it. There were also ways to get out of it related to your economic class in Vietnam, in the Vietnam era, in the draft era. But it was, by and large, I mean, not everybody's Trump. Not everybody's able to, get the bone spurs excuse. Like most middle to, maybe upper middle class folks, it would have been not super, super easy to just like get out of it. But now it's sort of opposite where they are deliberately or similar in that they are still deliberately targeting people who have a strong economic incentive. It's one of the only ways to achieve class mobility for yourself in the United States that's left. If you're a low income person without much option to be going to college, let's say you're taking care of your family and like you're getting terrible grades in high school and like nobody's really talked to you about college being an option or community college or any other way to get up there, which itself is not a pipeline that's a great, reliable pipeline into the middle class anymore. It's a extremely attractive idea to go and, be housed and fed for however many years, to have the potential to go to college when you might not be able to, if you do unfortunately get disabled, potentially have the VA. And so there are signing bonuses involved as well. And so there are a lot of folks who it's the best option for them outside of, way more precarious ways of making a living or surviving in their community. And so that's definitely something to keep in mind. There is research that like the overall majority of people in the military are kind of middle class or upper middle class, but that's a little bit skewed because there's different classes within the military, right? Like the kind of folks who go into becoming a fighter pilot are not the person who is being kind of sold a bill of goods at the lunch table in the high school at like the low income Brownsville high school.
And
Um,
there's still are programs like ROTC, and
yeah,
that's basically, it's a college thing.
yeah.
So you have that whole and a lot of those people who come out of programs like that are the officers.
Yes, there's a huge class divide within the military as well, in that many of, not all, but many of the folks are who enter as officers are, higher socioeconomic class, and many of the folks who enter as enlisted or rank and file are more likely to not have that background.
We
And
were
they're,
all officers.
yeah,
We were all officers.
you had no, what did you say?
The nurses were all officers, and it was
Yeah.
because we had to deal with teams, and we had to have that hierarchy. But for the most part, yeah, you had to achieve it a different way. My brother actually got out for potential for asthma.
Oh,
Mm,
wow.
Potential for asthma. He never had asthma, but he had bad seasonal allergies. And my mother knew our doc very well.
yeah, yeah.
So that made my joining kind of interesting in my family, as you find that. But that said, my parents were all, the government knows best.
Mm.
There's a reason for this. This is good, Just
And
go with
did they still think that when you came home?
Yeah, and I really worked at all the drama of it. I mean, I'd sit out. You had incoming and outgoing rounds, or outgoing rounds. Outgoing rounds were ones that you sent out at night to clear the perimeter, and that's any hospital compound had that there. And I would sit out there and record, on the little cassettes that we had, and talk to them, and you hear whomp whomp in the background. And I wouldn't say anything about it. I just, so I would send them stuff like that, and just kind of, but it never made a dent. When I came
Mm.
back, they really didn't even want to talk with me about any of it. They just assumed that, that's it. It's over. It's done. But
Mm.
for my part, I was very lucky. I did not come back with a nasty case of PTSD. A lot of nurses do because you're constantly seeing, it's a different element. You're constantly seeing people who are in disrepair who should not be in disrepair. And that's a real drain on your head. But yeah, I lucked out, maybe because I spend too much time in my head. I don't know. It's I'm mucking around in there and throwing things out, whatever. But it's back on the thing about recruiters though. I once had a guy who'd been an Air Force officer who was a recruiter, and as a patient in my home hospice thing. He was a great guy. And and I said at one point, I said, "Ugh, you're a recruiter. You guys just lie all the time." And he looked at me and said, "I was Air Force. I didn't have to lie."
That's that Top Gun cockiness.
But how many kids did he tell you're going to be a fighter pilot
Mhm.
when,
Just
nine,
like Tom
nine,
Cruise.
yeah, 90% of the Air Force are not the people flying the planes.
I don't know. He was amazingly unpretentious, so he was probably fairly level with people, I would
Oh
think.
yeah, there are different
Well, if you're a
levels.
recruiter, you're a recruiter.
Well,
So as common defense, what issues are you working on? Are you working on the issues that motivate people to enlist in the first place? The income
That's
inequality.
yeah, so we have a couple priority campaigns. We're definitely supportive of creating that society where people don't feel like they have to join the military to advance. But we have sort of three big categories, three and a half, I'd say. Number one is End the Forever Wars. We were one of the organizations that were really pushing Biden on Afghanistan, on pushing people to call it a forever war, and on pushing him to eventually withdraw. It's a similar lens that we bring to conflicts like Iran, issues like with Venezuela, with Cuba. We are very much working, both in the Capitol Hill sense and on the outside sense with an inside outside strategy to change the conversation and to create much more democratic accountability for the way that we wage war in this country. Because right now, it's kind of a couple people making this decision without that many democratic accountability mechanisms. So that can be through stuff like war powers resolutions. That can be through changing the narrative, changing the culture. That can be through protests and actions of various kinds. We endorse various candidates. Who support the sorts of foreign policy that we would like to see. We're supportive of the Block the Bombs Act, we lobbied on Capitol Hill for that act, which would restrain the sale of 2,000-pound bombs and JDAMs to Israel. We would prefer, stronger measures as well. But that's like the thing that has the most potential to pass. And the thing about that kind of weapon is it really only has one use, which is massive strategic bombing. And what Israel is using it for is to destroy apartment buildings, not to kind of wage any kind of actual counterinsurgency strategy. And so, that makes it an easier sell in Congress where you're like, hey, they don't need this for their stated purposes. The thing is, their stated purposes are not their real purposes. So there's End the Forever War. So lots of things that go under there. Then the second is No War on Our Streets. So that's basically talking about the ongoing militarization of American society and the attempts at state repression by the Trump administration and kind of creeping authoritarianism in the United States. So that's we kind of are always pushing for both ICE accountability and to abolish ICE. We're pushing to make it so that the National Guard is not deployed in our streets. There's no reason for the National Guard to be performing domestic civilian law enforcement. That's like a major risk factor for further authoritarianism and potentially a fascist takeover. We also are supportive of reducing the flow of military weapons and military kit to police departments. They don't really have a need for it. It's basically just of a piece with what we've been talking about in terms of the militarization of our society. In broad strokes, it's the military exists to protect the country, to defend the country. It does not exist to be used against Americans. And you saw that in the Vietnam era with Kent State. We're not too far away from that kind of reality. So the third campaign right now is VA Not for Sale. So that's talking about what we talked about earlier in terms of really pushing back against VA privatization and pushing to make it the high quality hospital system that it can be, the example of what it might look like to have government healthcare in the United States. And also a institution that represents a promise that was made at the very least disabled veterans who go over there for whatever reason, get hurt, or get PTSD or whatever it might be, and have a high standard of care waiting for them. That is not the private healthcare system. Most of your viewers are probably intimately familiar with the private healthcare system and its problems in the United States. And it is our position that we need to be moving in the opposite direction, not towards privatization. And then sort of we have one other initiative called Veterans Power America, which is all about the climate transition, and specifically that there are a lot of positions within the military that transition basically one-to-one to jobs in the renewable energy sector. And so we're trying to pass legislation to make it easier for that pipeline to happen. And to just advance the cause of building more renewables in general. And so the other thing about us too is these are our big kind of national level priority campaigns, but on a state level and on a local level, we also I, at least in my organizing, but also I know many of my other organizers around the country, we really try to empower our members to work on what they care about. We had a couple of people go up to Tax the Rich in Albany to the rally to pressure Hochul to sort of increase taxes on the wealthy to fund services for the rest of us. That fits under the rubric of making it a little bit less of a forced choice to join the military for some folks. We had folks who worked on New York for All, which fits under No War on Our Streets, which is a piece of state level legislation that would make it much harder for ICE to collaborate with police departments. That is currently being hashed out in the state budget process in New York as we speak. That's a top level overview of our 3-ish kind of priority campaigns at the moment.
That's amazing.
Michael,
Oh, sorry.
spectacular, because I've been a member of Common Defense for a long time, but every time I look for them at a protest or something like that, I have no idea where they are. and you can't. I just haven't been getting any kind of information from anywhere. But this is great. I actually feel that his work is connecting us on a ground level, which is a great thing.
And we have a presence here in New York in terms of we've had staff, but I'm the first New York City organizer. So, we have members all over the country. We are only able to have organizers in certain places, which sort of changes from time to time. And so, it's been great to see a bunch of folks like Susan and others who have been members for a long time, and to really knit them together and bring them into an organizing community. Because, politics is a team sport.
Mhm.
And it
Yeah.
also gives us a chance to tap into certain things. Like I've got this next weekend, I've got a 20-hour thing to supposedly turn me into a street medic, which
Wow.
nothing that I would probably normally need, but if indeed Trump makes his threats about organizing in New York come real, we might, and I'm hoping I never do. But it's worth it to me with the background that I have that would seem to fit.
Yeah.
Hopefully at my age, but
And
That's
that's a,
amazing.
yeah, continue.
No, I was gonna say that's amazing. Yeah.
So, and that's another piece of the work that we do, which is we try to get our members involved in kind of the community monitoring efforts that have begun related to ICE and federal agencies in various large cities. So what that looks like is folks will kind of get out there, and if there's a report of federal law enforcement, they'll make sure to be filming. They'll be asking questions, making sure that the person has the correct warrant, documenting everything. If someone is being detained, asking for their information so you can contact legal assistance or their next of kin, and trying to basically show community support for these folks who are being kidnapped and abducted and taken to God knows where.
yeah.
I'd love to hear more about organizing like an intergenerational caucus. Like I feel like with a lot of groups, we're all in our 20s and 30s. What's it been
Mhm.
like working with people of all ages?
I think I'm the all age. Everybody else, I feel like I feel like I've become a Boy Scout and Girl Scout.
Leader. Yeah.
Now I'm picturing just like the Sound of Music, like with the Owens just leading a group of 7 kids through
Mhm.
the Alps. It's primarily young people,
Yeah.
younger people, I should say. I'm
Younger.
sorry. Yeah.
I mean, I'm definitely passionate about this topic. I think there are a lot of barriers between that, like, older folks run into when they try to get involved in organizing. We definitely have a couple folks who are, a little bit older, but I also want to challenge anyone who is doing this work to make an effort to be welcoming and to not kind of discount the wisdom, experiences, and kind of capabilities of people. I mean, some of the best volunteers I've ever had in my career as an organizer are retired folks, because they're done raising their kids. Mostly, they care about their communities. They've invested in their communities, and they have the time to help. And so, there definitely has been some interesting cross-generational things happening, though. So, for example, we sometimes meet at this place called Principal's Coffee House Brooklyn, which is kind of explicitly modeled after the coffee house movement during the Vietnam War, which was the anti-war movement would set up, run largely by GIs, not entirely, but they would set up coffee houses outside of military bases for anti-war GIs to come and connect with each other and consume and write written materials and music and all of that, basically as a space to organize. And it was really cool because we had Jim Gaffney, who is also a Vietnam era veteran. They didn't send him to Vietnam because in his recruiting conversation, this is one other reason they stopped the draft. And in his recruiting conversation, he told the recruiter, you shouldn't send me to Vietnam because if you do, I'll organize my platoon to defect and join the Viet Cong. And
That's perfect. That'll do it. Yeah.
so they sent him to Germany instead. They still accepted him to serve. But he pushed paper in Germany during the war because they're like, we do not want you within 1,000 miles of this situation. And he actually ended up using that information to help GIs get out of exploitative contracts that they entered into. because he worked in the JAG Corps, which is like the internal military legal apparatus. So he's well, he actually ended up using that knowledge to sort of support the causes that he believed in. But they still felt like they had to take him. So, nowadays you're not going to get that conversation in a recruiting office. But in any case, the nice kind of intergenerational moment was he participated in the coffee house movement. And so like firsthand knew about it. And so this, Afghanistan war era veteran who was inspired by it and had never, directly experienced it was able to connect with somebody who was like, dang, the stuff that we did back then, like people are still being inspired by it. People are still doing things related to it. And so, that piece has also been cool. There have been a couple of cool moments like that.
Yeah, it's amazing, Susan. I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk to you and have you on the show because yeah, your generation quite literally is the blueprint, and that story and that coffee house is proof of it. And as
I only knew the civilian coffee houses, actually. And that was part of what I was doing too, but that was on college campuses and it
Hmm.
was mostly protest. And it had quite a following, but college campus is not a bad place to put it because you have people who are, I have a great deal of admiration for anybody who, say, went to Canada and now has, full citizenship there, most likely, or who avoided it in any way. I can't even fault Orange Julius for his. Well, I'm sorry, it just happened.
no, that's
Anyway,
Oh,
awesome.
that's great.
was bone spurs because there were a lot of people who did that, and good on 'em,
Mhm.
because it's a protest. I had one of my best friends, even now, she was a 4-year nurse, so she got extra. She came out of it a slightly higher rank than I did, so forth. Was a university grad. Her husband was a conscientious objector, and I sang at their wedding before I went over. And they were, they were, it was a great match. She was all against what was happening, but very pragmatically realized that, hey, I can help on this level the people who got stuck over here and also some of the natives. She was an operating room nurse too, took the program. But it's kind of, if you want to dodge the draft, if there's a draft, go for it. I'm not going to be standing there saying, "Oh, you freaking draft dodger."
Do you think there are rumblings of Hegseth reinitiating the draft? Do we think that's real?
He's rumbling, but it would never hit. Anybody in the legislature who has a kid or a grandkid of that age
Mhm.
would probably go ballistic about it because they don't have to worry about that shit now. It's not a big deal. Let the people go who want to go, that sort of thing, whether it's a economic draft or, they're just feel like they want to go and lob some bombs. It's, I think that's a very moot point. And I think he'd have a very hard time getting it going. That said, nothing really about this whole regime would absolutely surprise me.
Mhm.
it's, it's a surprise a minute. As they say, the fire hose effect.
Yeah, our phones are on silent. Who knows what happens in the past half hour? You
Mm.
never know.
Exactly. You don't know. I mean, we could have. I just think about okay, if you were to give the high school bully the nukes, that's what you got.
Mm.
And it's because, as a malignant narcissist, which he obviously is,
Mhm.
he's not able to be wrong. So anything he does he's going to make it right, at least in his own mind, and he's going to push it out there. And the problem this time around is he doesn't have anybody in his whole protocol who is willing to step up and say, that's not right. Or even just simply don't be an asshole, something like that. But there were a couple of people in the old one, and eventually he learned how to fire them, without a great deal of blowback. But they held him through the whole regime, basically, until he was gone. And we don't have that now, so God only knows. But Hegseth, please, he's G.I. Joe to the Barbies. He really is.
Yeah, literally from TV.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And on the flip side, though, as we wind down, this is a selfish question that I ask everyone for selfish reasons because I need help finding hope. What gives you hope? What or who, if there are any candidates that you guys are supporting this cycle that you're excited about? If it's the new Bruce Springsteen tour.
Dear. Well, don't get me started on Brooklyn politics. I've been a Rep-U-Block member for the last 2 years. My husband and I and 2 other people represent our little dense area here. We're all in apartments for the most part. This year, the head of the Democratic Party, who is the most ambitious human being I've ever met, has decided that she's going to oppose our ground rule stuff. I mean, the only powers we have is we are allowed to go to or we're constituents for the meeting that they have every year, every 2 years, I think it is, where they discuss the rules and they discuss, how you're going to, what you have to reveal, what you don't have to reveal, and so forth. And normally she just kind of she puts out a little thing to all of us that basically says, if you're not going to the meeting, give me your proxy. Well, if you're on our side of the democratic socialist aisle, as it were, you say, no, we want to take proxies from anybody around us who qualifies to do that. And you don't need them because you're going to try to push through your agenda. Well, she's discovered that it starts at the ground level. So now instead of just opposing the people at the next level, which she's opposing thoroughly with people who some of them, the joke is, don't even know they're on the ballot. She's opposing us as well, and as many of us as she can with people who are operatives. So,
So do you have reason for hope in that?
that gives me despair. But what gives me hope is birds.
Yeah.
We were gone. There were so many more of them, and now there's just a huge number of them. And no matter what's happening, even with the shitty climate stuff that's going on, the birds are still singing in the morning. I walk outside. There's no basic changes that are absolutely awful. I mean, nobody's so far dropped a bomb on us, and maybe we'll avoid that. But I like, if we could put Bernie Sanders in some kind of a solution that caused him to be many Bernie Sanders, I would do it. No, there are people like that. That gives me hope. But
Well, and speaking of which, we've had some really exciting electoral. I mean, that's not the only. My reason for hope is the people who I meet day in, day out doing this work, but also just in general. I really do believe that most human beings and most Americans are actually good people who have been, many of whom, 49% of the voters of whom have been misled into this crazy cult. And not to say that necessarily all those people can be brought back, but I do sort of believe in the collective wisdom of democracy if it was actually extended to everyone, because not very many, like a lot of people don't vote. A lot of people aren't civically educated. We have a system where we sort of act as though this kind of layer of informed people who are involved in politics every time are a legitimate democratic mandate. But I would really love to see more expansion of how can we make it so that we are even more participatory, how we can make it so that more people turn out every time. And sort of in terms of specifics, taking that aside, I mean, at Common Defense, we're supporting folks like Abdul El-Sayed in Michigan, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan in Minnesota. We are supporting Graham Plattner in Maine for the general election, Zach Walz for the Iowa Senate candidacy, and then a bunch of other folks like that. We just had a really exciting victory with Chris Rabb in Philadelphia. Speaking of democratic socialism, he is a huge democratic socialist coming out of the Black abolitionist tradition. And so we have a lot of people who are standing up and saying, people like AIPAC, people like big hedge funds, people like corporations do not have a place in our movement. And instead that they're going to use people power to achieve our goals collectively. And that's really the antidote for a lot of these problems, is having a situation where our government is actually responsible to individual human beings instead of numbers on a balance sheet. And so, that is where I get hope. It's from the people.
People and birds. I love it. On the ground and in the skies. And thank you so much. Where can people find you or your work, buy your books?
Oh, please. Yeah, my books are on Amazon. There are only two of them. One was kind of a vanity project done by Peace Corps writers, which basically I had to make sure it was edited by someone else because it's the closest thing to edit to doing it yourself, but it does get it in the Library of Congress. But yeah, if you look for Don't Mean Nothing, that's my main thing. I'm currently re-editing and rewriting something that I wrote long ago that got roundly rejected by a lot of people for a lot of different reasons that my very good agent could not reconcile to, tell me what I should be doing with it. So I'm thinking maybe its time has come. So I'm working on that. And it's a little different, but it's a novel actually. But my book's a novel in stories of sorts. Valentine thought I might be the female Tim O'Brien, and it didn't necessarily work out.
Yet it hasn't.
Not yet, no.
No, but I have to admit, when I see somebody writing something like The Women, I say, a couple of us writers who wrote the era kind of gotten together on that and said, what the?
Oh, ooh, that's good. Okay, that's good tea because I read the book, but yeah, she wasn't there. Yeah.
I know her sources. They were very good. They were very good. Beth Parks, wonderful. She lives in Maine. She has all these records. In fact, if you go on her website, Beth Parks, like, national parks, you go on her website, she's got pictures from way back when. She was one of the pioneers who helped set up the first hospitals in Vietnam. And so, right there. And the other one was Diane Carlson Evans, who unfortunately, I believe, is under hospice care right now. But she she shepherded the entire movement to get our memorial up in DC. But these people were really good. So I'm assuming that the book is pretty decent. I have it. A friend sent it to me, but I'm not reading it at the moment.
Exactly. You lived it. It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But someday I might get back to it. I tend to read out of genre when I'm editing or writing, so I don't cross-pollinate anything. So I'm reading about giant spiders that have become sentient and stuff like that.
Incredible.
A little sci-fi.
Yeah, I was sitting there reading that the other day, and I was in the bathroom, and I got up to brush my teeth, and I lifted up my stopper in my sink, and this enormous cockroach called.
Oh, wow.
God, no, it's come to life.
Back in the hooch.
No, it's worse here. They're bigger. Brooklyn cockroaches.
Yeah, big and strong.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So for me, for Common Defense, look up www.commondefense.us. For my personal stuff, I do some of my own writing. I'm also an actor. michaelthomascarter.com. Also, you could follow me on Instagram _MichaelThomasCarter. I also have a Twitter that you can find by also searching Michael Thomas Carter. But if you really want to get involved with Common Defense, you can reach out to me on any of those platforms, or if you're interested in anything else. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'll have all the links in the show notes. And yeah, I'm so grateful to connect with people. And then now when I head out, I'm going to listen for the birds.
Yeah. Everybody,
they keep
homework.
Exactly. They keep singing. We can too.
That's right.
So I hope so. They certainly seem very busy here. A lot of
Yay, thank you so much. Thank you for listening and or watching War is Stupid, an anti-war podcast about war. Please subscribe, rate and review, tell your dads. We'll see you next time.